Our next submitter is Fiona Wilson, submission number 76.
Kia ora katoa. I'm going to make this fairly brief because I've got another appointment to go to, but I'm presenting as an individual and a homeowner in Park Road. One of the first points I want to make is that I'm concerned about the lack of community consultation with the people directly affected by this proposal on Park Road. I've spoken to my neighbours and they weren't aware of it at all. I think unless they got the Manawatu standard and read everything, they weren't aware of it. Unfortunately, some of them could not be with me today because I realise this is a bit of a numbers game from what I've heard this morning. However, I'll continue just to speak on my own behalf. So my home's in Park Road, approximately 350 metres from the Fitzherbert Avenue intersection. I've owned this property for over 20 years and have become increasingly concerned about the traffic congestion, particularly between 8 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the morning and between 3 and 6 o'clock Monday to Friday. During these times, I and my neighbours are already unable to turn right safely from our properties. In order to turn left, we have to wait until a courteous driver allows us entry. I've witnessed or heard several traffic incidents close by due to the congestion at these times, and am also aware of a child being hit on the pedestrian crossing near my property. In my opinion, any housing development on this corner is only going to add further congestion to the area, and I fail to see how the risks can be mitigated if this goes ahead. Mr Mayor, you mentioned about the ring road, and certainly the Fonterra trucks do frequent Park Road. My house shakes every time they go past, but they are not the ones that are causing the congestion at these times. I've already identified in my submission that I prefer to see the area kept for recreational purposes and community use rather than a housing development. I support several of the submissions that have gone in front of me, particularly Palmerston North Girls High and the Environment Network Group. I consider the concept of multi-storey apartments to be totally out of kilter with our most attractive entrance to the city. I consider coming over past Massey, over the bridge, past the Esplanade, Historic Girls High and the tennis courts is a lovely entry to the city, and no matter how flash and new an apartment might be, over time they date and look tired, and I consider we'd lose an opportunity for a green space which we won't get back. So that's basically me.
Thank you, Fiona. Councillors, are there any questions? No, well, that was easy. Thank you for coming in. We appreciate that. You do have to head off. Right, our next submission is submission number 25, Jim Owen. Jim, were you here earlier when we explained the traffic light system?
No.
Yeah, so you've got 10 minutes and it'll... Perfect. Perfect. There'll also be quite a loud noise. And you're welcome to start when you're ready.
Yes, good morning, councillors. I wish to strongly support the proposal number 1 as outlined. Let me say at the outset that I know this area of the city well, as I have lived around the corner from it in Jekyll Street for over 50 years and walked past it to work for 35 of those years. During part of that time, I was a member of the Lawn Tennis Club and served on the board of Palmerston North Girls High School. Whilst at my age, I guess climate change is something that some may say is not my concern. I do have children and grandchildren and feel strongly on the subject. This is the main reason for my support of the proposal, which I would state as follows. While I am not against citizens having the right to build on the traditional section, sometimes called the quarter acre, these days that is not always wanted. My own children living in larger urban areas of New Zealand prefer to live in a city, and indeed many people today support that lifestyle. I would suggest that it is not just the old who wish to live in villages. Because we have traditionally provided facilities for, in italics, the house on the quarter acre, or its modern version, local bodies in New Zealand have struggled to finance more and more distant subdivisions. The economic advantage of providing smaller, taller dwellings close to our city centres is overwhelming. Councillors, I would suggest you must ask themselves how long they can continue to encourage subdivisions of valuable land at greater and greater distance from the central city. This involves the additional cost of new infrastructure to service all of those new sections with their high carbon cost and the continuing maintenance of them. Infill housing subdivisions will only achieve so much. For councillors such as yourselves, the advantages of having 80 households on a small block of land in an area such as we are discussing versus 80 sections at the end of the road on the city outskirts will be obvious. And I'm sure I would be teaching you all to suck eggs if I continued any further on that theme. It is obvious that the high cost site would require multi-storey building to be economic. And while there is plenty of examples, motels and Palmerston North Girls High School, of 2-storey buildings, I can see no problems with well-designed 3 or 4-storey additions on that site, as there are in other parts of Fitzherbert Avenue. While there may be parts of the city where additional green spaces or parks are needed, I would suggest that the Lagoon, Esplanade, Wallace, Ongley, etc., part of town is not one of them. We're well set up for parks down our way, I can promise. There have been, for many years, 3 large tennis court blocks available within 10 minutes walk of this proposal. And although one of them at the former Teachers College is now gone, it is a long time since I've seen anyone waiting to use a court. I am happy that, however, that the courts will stay as in this proposal. This last weekend I had a birthday and was lucky enough to have my children and grandchildren in attendance. Driving down Linton Street just after 5 on Friday night to move on to Park Road, I had to pause a moment as another motorist let me in to the lane turning to Fitzherbert Avenue. With the change of lights, a number of cars turned right and I just made it. When I commented about the traffic problem, this obviously could have been the derision from my Wellington and Auckland-based children said it all. Fitzherbert Avenue and the streets adjoining are not, and with the proposed addition, will not be a traffic problem. Thanks very much.
Thank you for your submission. Are there any questions? The Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Jim. You spoke about medium and high density working on a site like that, and you probably touched on it a little bit, but the design needs to be good, obviously.
Yes, absolutely. That I would think that's a given. I mean, you're not going to put slab houses down in that particular area. It's just simply wouldn't be economic. It's a high priced property. It's got to be kept that way. Not just because of my property values, my friends. It's nothing to do with that. It's simply that that part of town will need high quality buildings.
Thank you.
Right, thank you, Jim. There don't seem to be any other questions for you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Our last submission this morning is submission number 65, John Bent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mayor and councillors. Just a couple of comments to introduce myself and where I'm coming from and what I say. Our son recently, at the beginning of this year, moved to Auckland. Rented an apartment on the edge of the central business district, which is closer to the Auckland City Council chambers than Huia Street. And the transport system in Auckland is quite different to here. And with the inner ring road, one of the new stations will be within tens of metres of that apartment block. And it has a garage because, as it turns out, it is simply the easiest way and best, most efficient way to get about Auckland rather than use their transport system. The other one is I'm a former member of the Remyara Tennis Club. That club there has been there for many, many years. And will predate some of the homes there and certainly the residents. They moved there knowing it was there. They did not have it imposed. The club did not have the residents imposed upon them. And I have been a guest and played at Parnell. One of the reasons given for proposal for housing is lost opportunity to address housing supply and provide alternative sources of revenue. Alternative sources of revenue. You can do that by looking at your own budget, both operationally and for capital. Social housing consumes something approaching $1 million a year. Current expenditure just on Papeoia is the order of $6 million plus. That is cost shifting from the taxpayer to the ratepayer. So if you want money, sell it. Now, the other one is goal for an eco-city. Why does Palmerston North need extra housing? A consequence of extra housing is extra energy required to supply the needs of the residents of those houses. Why does Palmerston North need more housing? More houses in Palmerston North, more energy required. Where is that energy, extra energy going to come from? Fossil fuels. And we've heard mention of climate change before here today. So what you're doing by earmarking this land for housing, or proposing it for housing, is saying, yes, we will impose an environmental benefit, a disbenefit on New Zealand and the world. The final point I wish to make, I and several others, Bullocks are over there, and the late Councillor Pat Kelly travelled to Wellington to speak to the House Committee. The House Committee reported against the bills on the basis it had no community support. And my take on the submissions here is quite simply, housing is not supported by the community of Palmerston North as represented in those submissions. And that is very clearly so. And of course, should this council choose to proceed further down this line, I'll again be going to the House and saying, look, doesn't have community support. Thank you. Now I look forward to your questions.
I've got a question for you, John. When you say that the submissions show that there's no community support, we've heard verbal submissions from people this morning who are members of our community who were in strong support. So do you have a view that those submissions don't count?
No. I have a view on looking through the submissions. Of the 80 submissions, there is a clear minority that support housing. The others there's a majority saying, yes, retain for recreational purposes, but it's not a big majority. And there's those who put other things forward on the same line, and you've heard from what, Environment Network Manawatu, Tennis Club, and Girls High this morning.
So your view is there is little support rather than no support?
Yeah, there is little support. It is clearly not a majority. You don't need to rely on the staff of the Chief Executive to count the numbers.
Right, Councillor Barrett, you've got a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, John, for speaking to your submission. I just wanted to explore and try to understand your logic around this potential housing development exacerbating climate change. And the reason I ask around that is that most of the advice that we get around the future development of the city is that having greater density and people living closer to the center is actually far more environmentally efficient than gobbling up farmland and making people even more reliant on fossil fuel for transport. So I was just really trying to understand the crux of your point around the claim that you put to us.
The point was, as I introduced by mentioning my son's apartment, it is that it should be in the city, not outside the city. The city, I mean the inner core. In other words, in or around the central business district. That's what I mean by in the city. That's why I highlighted his apartment. It is in this boundary of the central business district. It's got more bus routes going past it than Palmerston North's got in total.
Yeah, and so this one being 10 minutes walk outside of that you see as being prohibitive?
Is it 10 minutes walk?
I think I could walk in.
I can walk in 10 minutes on not a. It's just thinking, going back to my student days, I'll put it in the range of 15 to 20 minutes, and I'm basing that on walking from Paiatua Street to Massey.
Well, perhaps people have different walking paces, but just to sum up, then understand that your view is that only within the ring road we should be contemplating this sort of activity. That'd be a fair summary.
Did you mention ring road?
Yes, the inner ring road.
Oh, right. Okay. That would be, that not only, but about that sort of spread. And the other one is if you really want to encourage development, intensification of housing without increasing the population, is you just simply limit the land that can be converted, the green space that can be converted to housing.
Thanks. I'll probably leave it there, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Bowen, you've got a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, John, for speaking to your submission. As somebody who's been through the full extent of this process before, noting your trip to Wellington in 2007, would you agree it's a robust process, that the community will have their say?
In this process? No, because I simply believe, like so many consultations undertaken by this council, and this is going back decades, is you do not start by asking the question, what do you want to say on this topic? you put forward a proposal to be considered, which I think has got the cart well and truly before the horse. And trying to think of a good...
You've answered my
example.
question, thank you, and I think that is the time.
I just think just sort of a good example. The square out there.
Sorry, John, unfortunately your submission time is up. So we will conclude that there. So we do have 2 recommendations on the screen that the Planning and Strategy Committee hear submissions from presenters who indicated their wish to be heard in support of their submission, and that the community note the procedure for hearing of submissions as described in the procedure sheet. So I'll move those. Seconded by Councillor Bowen. Thank you. Councillors, are there any comments on the recommendations? Great, I'll invite you to vote. That has carried 100%. We now move on to item 6, which is the summary of submissions, and I'll invite David Murphy to come and speak to that.
Kia ora koutou, Mayor, councillors. There's not a lot to say really. I mean, the summary of submissions is there just to support councillors to get a feel for the overall sort of tone and number of submissions and the topics. So I guess thank you to the submitters for coming along today. We've listened intently and taken some notes, and there's a number of issues there that we will follow up in the report back. So yeah, I guess, you know, emphasising that next steps is that there will be a report back to the committee with some recommendations, having, you know, reviewed the submissions and listened to the submissions today. So I don't intend to obviously speak to the summary. It's there just to help councillors sort of, as I said, get their heads around the submissions. So happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, David. I have a question around the verbal submissions or the material presented today. Has that been captured in terms of an example would be the Manawatu Tenants Union who talked about a favourable option of medium density housing with a preference of, you know, first of social housing, then of market, then of affordable. So is that captured somewhere, because their written submission said that they oppose that? And likewise, there were other submitters that provided more context around their support or objection that wasn't as simple as a yes, no.
I've certainly been taking notes. I mean, this is recorded. I imagine there'll be some minutes, so I'm sure that won't be lost.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, David. I just wondered if you could comment on some of the points that were raised by submitters around the summary of submissions itself not being a good representation of the useful comments that were made, and no summary being made of the numbers for and against. So not so much a comment on submissions itself, but a comment on this summary, whether or not you feel that those comments around the usefulness of the summary, or whether or not it contained a fair representation of comments, is reasonable.
I think that any summary is intended to always support the full submissions. So it's, you know, the full submissions are on the order paper. So, you know, I don't think there's any intent to sort of misrepresent or undermine any of the submissions. I think the feedback that there is not a summary of total submissions in support and opposition is useful feedback, and something we could consider for future summaries.
Thank you.
Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you, David. I think my question's around going out with a proposal or going out with a blank sheet of paper is probably the question. And my question is around what do you think we would get more feedback on? I know what my answer is, but I just want to know what the expert answer is. Going out with, yeah, tell me what your answer is.
Well, the principles of consultation require the council under a special consultative procedure to have a proposal. We don't put out an LTP that just says, what do you want to do? We put out an LTP that is a plan that people submit and respond to. So you take those principles to this proposal. We've put out a plan which is to change the necessary processes to use this land for housing. We've considered other options. It's within council's ability to make a decision to choose one of those other options.
Thank you, David. We've been criticised for going out with a predetermined plan, but we're actually going out there to ask them what they think of it and what we could do with it. So that's what your answer is. So thank you for that.
We do have another question, but just like to make a comment that comments from the gallery are unnecessary, and I would suggest that you refrain from making comments in relation to advice that staff are giving, and if that continues, they'll be asked to leave. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, David, for the report. Just looking ahead to the further report that is to come, and just wanted to get an understanding of how much sort of demographic information might be there to help support our understanding of the sort of the submissions in the whole, I suppose, and specifically sort of reflecting on what we've heard this morning with some quite localized concerns by neighbors that really have a lot of lived experience in that environment versus people that might have a broader community experience or perspective. So when the report comes to us, will we have some information about sort of an understanding of the sort of near neighbor view versus perhaps other people coming from other geographies in the city?
Yeah, we can certainly look at the submissions and include a level of analysis that looks at how people have responded from what I'd call more of an effects perspective. So if you look at the submissions, people have responded sort of from a citywide sort of, is this a good decision type approach, housing versus recreation, but there are a number of submissions which are more effects based and probably leaning towards more of an RMA type of response. Bearing in mind there would be, whatever decision the council makes to use this land for housing or some community use or an environmental centre, all of that development would have to go through the RMA process. But I think we can certainly look at a level of analysis within the report back that differentiates sort of neighbour effects from citywide concerns.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair.
Councillors, are there any other questions? Thank you, David. I will move the resolution on the screen, seconded by Councillor Hancock. Is there any comment? Right, I will invite you to vote. That has carried 14-4 with 1 abstention. Our next item is a deputation from Homes for People. And we have got Darren and Vaughan presenting.
You'll appreciate how far I've come this morning for this presentation with the comments made last week with Pat Hancock. But it's my pleasure to be here today with my Homes for People hat alongside Darren Birch, who is the founder with his wife, Sherry, as a response to the barriers many people were finding to entering the housing market here in our community, both in home ownership and in the rental housing market. And between Darren and Sherry, they have over 30 years experience working and living with people who cannot access the resources required for home ownership. Many know of my involvement with Homes for People over the last couple of years, and with my wife, Rafaela Kaitiaki, initially at the Kawakawa Lodge facility, which we continue to run, but more recently, since December, been involved with Pureri Lodge, again in Pioneer Highway, and have the insights of working alongside people that are vulnerable in our community that is needing provision for housing because there's a shortage in our community. I've also had the insights to market a home recently, which was one of our original first homes in Wakefield Street, that because Homes for People have a first right of refusal when the home comes up for sale to protect it from going out to the market to being a market rental, was able to market that and have the privilege of selling it to another young man just last week as the first home in that complex. And through that process, obviously having inquiries for having it as a first home, but also a number of other prospective landlords wanting to buy it at a cheaper rate and looking to market it to the wider community for a profit, and seeing Darren turning down that offer just because they wanted to pay the most for that property. We want to get a homeowner that will get the most benefit. So with that introduction, I'd just love to pass it to Darren, who will cover the track record and what we have in the pipeline and pose a couple of questions throughout the presentation. Thank you.
Kia ora. So just short of 3 years ago, we dug our first hole, and it hardly seems like we could have come this far in 3 years, but we have. And it's thanks to many, many people in the community. People who have been investors, corporate partners who have joined with us, discounted products, supported us, Central Energy Trust who supported us in our first project, and many others. And on the screen there, we started with a concept. Now, many people kind of looked at it and went, well, this is ambitious. I'm not sure if it will be able to be done. But we're now in the position where I'll get to where we've got to with our housing, with our new build side, but we've not just doing new builds now, but when we started to get involved in the housing sector, as Vaughan indicated, we became aware of the breadth of needs within our community around public housing, community housing, social housing, whatever term we want to call it. There is a significant shortage in our current dynamic. And for that reason, the government has decided to use the likes of motels and so forth to provide housing. And it's been a privilege to be able to support people in those houses. So on the left-hand corner there, you can see that, well, if you can do the sums, we're now managing 71 units on behalf of the community for people who are vulnerable, for people who have high and complex needs. These are families, these are individuals, these are people who otherwise will be on a couch, otherwise in a car, in a garage. Yes, we can all agree that a motel is not ideal. I'll put my hand up and say that too. But it's better than the alternatives in the current dynamic. In your notes, I've written out some notes there. You might like to read ahead or just have a look at some of those. I actually quoted some documentation from the 1980 New Zealand official yearbook. It's amazing how similar we are 40 years later. I also quoted some other statistics in there. Housing New Zealand in 1980 had 19% of New Zealand's rental portfolio, 19%. In 2019, they have 10%. There's a huge lag in the provision of public housing for people in our community. And we've been able to provide a little bit of that through some private investment. We've been able to do more with the assisted ownership and with the first home ownership. But anything that can be done needs to be done at this point in time because there's so much demand in the community. So moving on to the new builds, because the reality is we need to be building, not just shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. We've now completed 13 homes. Vaughan told you a snippet of one of 2 stories now where we've had first home buyers who have found themselves in a new foundation in life, one of whom got married and has sold her house. One of whom found herself in a solid place and decided that she wanted to return to the South Island where she grew up. And so we've had the privilege of being able to buy those homes back and on-sell them to first home buyers. And I did get an interesting look from an investor who was willing to pay a lot more, and I just said, not interested. And it was quite fun, actually. I like that. Under construction, we've got 5 homes at the moment. We're now doing homes in Levin as well. We've got 26, I think it is, going through design consent process. And then we've got land for about another 10 and joint venture discussions for upwards of another 20 on top of that. Why are we here? This graphically is what the reality is on the street. These are not stories when they're on a screen like this, but they are stories. That dark blue line at the bottom there, or that top left graph, is Palmerston North Social Housing Register, up to date to the latest statistics in March. Down the bottom is Social Housing Register national total. You can see what's happening nationally. In Palmerston North, the demand is for 1 bedroom, the dark block at the bottom, and 2 bedroom, the next colour up. That is primarily where the need is. People often who are single, often single parents, who they're not in a double income, able to afford a $675,000 new build that one of the developers in town's doing. They're not able to buy a $400,000 house that needs renovation because they're not at the life stage to be able to do the renovation. And so what we're offering in terms of market affordable, yes, there's definitions around that, but market affordable, low cost housing, under $350,000 for a 2-bedroom house is unique in this city. What we're here to talk about, or what we're here to explore or to put on the table, is we would love to be able to work with the City Council. We're working with other individuals, with other entities, with existing corporates. We would love to be able to work with you. We would love to be able to work with central government. We would love to be able to work with iwi. We will put our hand to the plough where we can get effect, positive effect for our community. And so we would love to, that down the bottom left corner is a botanical road site that we've been working with the consent team on to put 8 new homes on that site, which is really a neat outcome. And we're looking forward to implementing that. The top right you'll be familiar with, and we would love to be able to work with you on the Whakaronga development for assisted ownership, for social housing, for whatever, in whatever way we can assist the council. Thank you.
Happy to take any questions, Madam Chair.
Start off with the Mayor.
Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Vaughan. You're looking very logoed up there with your tops.
Thank you.
Oh, look, congratulations on the work you're doing. It's really inspiring. So, is it just Palmy, or I mean, I saw a couple of other.
So we've got a couple in Levin. Oh, we have a couple in Levin now. So we've got our first build where the bricks are on. Should be being finished today, actually. We've bought our second site down there, and we've got an offer on a larger site going in later this week.
So how does it work? Does do you get a group of investors that come together, they underpin it, and then what happens?
Yeah, so at the moment we've got just shy of $2 million in investment from individuals in the community, for $250,000 investors, and then a group of others. And then last year, we also set up a secondary company to assist Homes for People because they're able to leverage equity better. And so they've bought a rest home and a motel, and they're also looking at another site to assist Homes for People.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, team. So good to see you guys here. With the waiting list, do you guys have a separate waiting list for you, or do you use the Housing New Zealand waiting list?
No, it's a separate waiting list. So we have an expression of interest, and we have over 150 households on that list. Yeah, that's for the home ownership side of things.
And on that list, how many children are on this waiting list? How many? Well, I guess
you're asking the wrong person. Sorry, Renee. I can get that information for you, but I don't have it on tap.
I think it's important to add that the target market for a first home owner isn't. They need to be ready to be able to sustain their own mortgages, and typically it's the 4% that are just below being able to get a bank mortgage in their own means. And that are just missing out. And with the increasing values in properties, it's getting tougher and tougher. And the other ones is about 2% that are repositioning themselves. Either they've lost their spouse and the children are left home and wanting to downsize, and we create that opportunity as well. So they're a core part of the target market for a first home owner.
The reason why we include downsizers in our mix is because every downsizer that we get into one of our low maintenance houses releases a family home to the market.
Very cool. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both. I was interested to hear about how the finances of this work in the background. I wondered if you could tell us why people get involved as investors. You know, what's in it for them, and are you looking for any more?
Always looking. I'll put it this way. We've got an investor who invested $60,000 with us 3 years ago. They have been part of 13 positive housing outcomes to date. Who else has invested $60,000 in an initiative where they still get their term deposit return on investment and has had that sort of impact in our community?
Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you both for talking to us, and thanks for all the wonderful work that you're doing. That final slide that you talked about was, what might collaboration look like in this space, and you've given us a few examples. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how you see that collaboration could look like with the City Council, and just could you give us a bit of an indication of whether there are conversations already happening with officers, or what your view would be on how we can enable that to happen?
No conversations at present. We are very open to create. I'm a big one for win-win situations. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. And I'm very happy to work on the basis that those that put the most risk in get the most reward out of a deal. So if council puts land up and Homes for People goes and raises the money to do the build and then split the share at the end, then it's, something in the closer to 50-50. If council goes, no, we'll fund the whole initiative, we just want Homes for People to do it, and we want Homes for People to be a service provider, then council will get the majority of the return on investment. If council says, we'll sell you the land, we'll give you some favourable terms and you can pay for it on, at a later date, then obviously council will get less of a return on investment out of that. That's assuming the assisted ownership or full ownership model. If it comes down to community housing, I think I've spoken to at least one or two of you and made my position clear that I'd be quite happy for Homes for People to end up managing a lot of community housing. We've got a great team which includes 4 social workers and over 10 staff working with households. And we'd love to be able to continue to support the community increasingly and more broadly.
Thanks, Darren. That's helpful.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Darren. Thanks, Vaughan. My question was pretty much where Karen was. So I guess building on that. Sorry, Councillor Naylor was building on that. So you sort of came back with the full sort of menu. All those options from your end. But is there a preference? Have you got a view around a better way forward from your perspective?
I'll put it this way. When we put someone into a house, they get housing security. When they can work towards home ownership, they get housing security and financial security, and they can leave a legacy to their family. So for me, always, if I can assist someone towards home ownership, I'll take that preference. We run a program called Homesaver, which is where people get a 5-year tenancy, low quartile rent, maximum 3% increase on rental each year. And at the end of that time, they get towards their deposit 25% of the capital gain. So let's say that it's a $400,000 house at the start, and then it's $500,000 5 years down the track. They would get $25,000 towards their deposit. The investors get 75% uplift. And so it's not a bad deal, especially when you think that you've got someone in the house that's going to look after it like it's their own home. Oh, because it will be. And you get 52 weeks in the year rent guaranteed for 5 years. And so it actually financially is a really, really good model.
Thank you. My second and final question would be just around what you see as the major bottlenecks that you're facing over, say, the next 3 to 5 years.
Over the next 3 to 5 years, number one is obviously access to land. We strongly believe that there is more money in the private sector than there is in the government sector. So the ability to tap into philanthropic investors is very real and there. So access to good pieces of land to work with. At the moment, we've got a bunch of piecemeal stuff, and that's okay. But, some of that Botanical Road site would have been really nice.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Question from the Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just thought of something while those questions were being asked. You heard, you may have heard, I'm not sure, Darren, what we discussed, potential opportunities around Huia Street. If it was to go into some sort of, and it's an if, into a housing sort of development of some sort, would your organisation be interested?
Very much so, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Darren and Vaughan. There's no further questions for you.
Thank you very much.
So we've got a resolution in front of us that the committee resolve the deputation be received for information. It's moved by Councillor Harpiter, seconded by Councillor Hancock. Is there any comment? Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we should really comment how well this organisation has done in helping us in housing people with vulnerability and needs. I remember when Darren came to us way back at the start, and there was quite ambitious goals, and I thought, well, he's going to have a battle, but you're starting to get there, so congratulations. I also think this housing continuum graph here, I think, is one of the best I've seen to explain the housing continuum from social affordable to market, and where emergency fits into full market, where a community housing provider fits in, and where the private sector fits in, because it's always been a little bit of a bone of contention where, do you just leave it up to the market, is there need for a community or Housing New Zealand to be involved? I think that explains it really, really well. And anybody that doesn't understand that, they need to see that chart. So well done, gentlemen. Great effort. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. The Mayor really has covered that off well. I suppose what spoke to me from the presentation was the comment one of you made about they're not stories when they're on a graph, but they're stories to homes for people. And each of those people into a house, families given secure accommodation, represents a good outcome for our community. And also, I was very interested to hear a good outcome for the investors in our community as well. So I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing.
Right, with no further comment, we'll look to vote on that. Great, that has carried 100%. We now look to confirm the minutes of the 10th of June meeting. That'll be moved by Councillor Hancock, seconded by Councillor Harper. Are there any comments? Great, I'll invite you to vote. That has carried 100%. We now move on to the deliberations of submissions to the amendment to the Cemeteries and Crematorium Bylaw 2018. And I'll invite Julie up.
Kia ora koutou. I don't have anything further to add to this report. Just to note that Lily Cato, who prepared the amendment, and also Kathy Deva Todd are available to answer questions.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any questions? No questions. Thank you very much, Julie and Lily and Kathy, for making yourself available. I will move the resolution on the screen, seconded by Councillor Johnson, and I'll open up for any comment. Councillor Johnson.
Yes, I just wanted to comment that I obviously support this recommendation, but I thought that the report brought up some interesting changes, I suppose, that are happening in society in general regarding grave decoration, and that I personally take a very liberal view to allowing people to express their grave decoration and their mourning in a way that suits them. But I think we should take note of the comments around the way that people are decorating graves is growing rapidly, and also the level of diversity that we have in the city, not only within ethnicity, but also the grieving process varies from person to person. And I do support a freer approach. And I think we just should note that society doesn't remain the same, and that what was considered to be the stiff upper lip approach maybe 50 years ago has changed a little bit, and I support us moving to accommodate the change that's occurred in the community.
Right, it doesn't look like we have any other comments, so I will invite you to vote on that. That has carried 100%. Moving on to item 10, review of the Trade Waste Bylaw 2015, the section 155 determination. And we have got Julie and Peter presenting. Thank you.
Thank you. We're happy for this report to be taken as read. The recommendation is to proceed with the development of the trade waste bylaw.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Julian. Thanks, Peter. The Section 155 determination report did give a couple examples, for instance, peak charges, etc. Would we expect that the things that are examples in that report might be a component of what is the focus of the consultation on the draft?
So at this stage, there's probably a fairly wide array of options to look at. When we come back with a draft bylaw, those options will be made clearer. But certainly, yes, I think that's certainly on the table.
And in terms of, I guess, seeing from my perspective, the bylaw performing a couple functions, one around the compliance and one around sort of setting up a framework for cost recovery. Just wanting to ensure that sort of both of those aspects will be fully explored in the next phase.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
No other questions, councillors? Thank you, Julie and Peter. So we've got the 4 recommendations on the screen. I will move those. Seconded by Councillor Hancock. Is there any comment? Great, I will invite you to vote. And that has carried 100%. Our next item is the transport portfolio update in the name of Councillor Barrett. Councillor Barrett, is there anything you'd like to add to your update?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There are 2 additional matters that I did want to flag before turning to the recommendations in there. These 2 additional matters have come to light since we filed the report, but I felt it was worth just speaking to them briefly. The first is around safety in school zones. So you will be aware of the stories in the media, specifically from those schools that don't yet enjoy a 40K designation outside their school zone. And just to let you know that both Councillor Bowen and myself met with Milson School and came away with I think a reasonably clear view of their concerns, as well as a reasonably clear view that those concerns are probably replicated throughout the city. And so I think as council, we should be at this point well aware of those issues and consider an approach that might deal with them comprehensively rather than needing to reinvent the wheel each time a new school reaches a threshold of concern. Don't have a recommendation particularly around that at this stage, but just wanted to flag it. The second point is, again, beginning to surface, and it's around that loss of momentum on the completion of the shared path to Ashurst. You're probably aware already that there's a petition circulating in the community and that there is a palpable level of, I suppose, frustration with the status quo, I suppose, and a real desire in the community to see that resolved. So I did want to add those 2 particular points to the written report. And in addition to that, draw everyone's attention to the 2 recommendations that are on the report. One of which seeks to address the sort of pedestrian movement area and encouraging us as a council to ensure that we have a positive and well communicated vision for the pedestrian experience in the city, and to do that through a plan that would both reflect some of the activity that's already underway, as well as identify any gaps and a plan to close those. The second recommendation is around the urban cycle development and ensuring that future funding for that network enhancement is considered in the long-term plan process. So those are the two recommendations that we would like to see considered today. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Councillors, if there's any questions on the portfolio update, including the recommendations in the update, then we can take those. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I've got a couple of questions. One is that, and I guess through you to Councillor Barrett, one is that I guess the portfolio update was written before the memo was produced from Strategy and Planning. And I wondered if in the light of that, you had considered changing your second recommendation so that it reflected the recommendation from staff, or if you just wanted us to consider your recommendation and the staff recommendation is just for information from your perspective.
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Johnson, for that question. I certainly did put this recommendation in before the staff memo was generated. I think the position that I've come to on it is that we would be better served at this point to proceed with the development of a plan that could give us some insight into what the needs and opportunities are ahead of the long-term plan, so that we could actually have an opportunity to consider any budget allocation that might be implicated there. I would acknowledge that that would mean that it would be a less substantive plan than we would get through the officer's recommendation. But my concern is with the approach outlined by officers is that we might end up a year and more down the track before we really got onto any planning, and then potentially we would have a plan that would be a bit stranded because there might not actually be any budget allocation available to actually give any impetus to any of the recommendations in the plan at that stage. So my preference is that we see what we can get back in the next few months and see if that gives us any further information that we might want to bring to the long-term plan process.
Would it be appropriate to ask for a staff comment on whether that's achievable given the memo?
I think we can ask if the time frame is achievable, but the staff have provided their advice in the accompanying memo around what their suggestion is to do with that recommendation. If Councillor Barrett is interested in pursuing the recommendation on the screen, then I will ask Cheryl to provide a comment around whether that, on your view on the time frame of that 6-month time frame.
The priority for staff at the moment is the long-term plan, infrastructure strategies and the like, but I will ask the manager, David Murphy, to comment on that. He's closer to the individual priorities than I am. I would like to point out that there is no budget provision for this piece of work.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot more to add than what's in the memo and what Cheryl's just said. I mean, I think there's a significant amount of demands on the team at the moment. As Cheryl said, there's no budget to deliver this, and we would effectively have to reprioritise existing work to deliver this within 6 months. I guess the other thing is gathering good information to inform a pedestrian plan would be part of that, and would have to think about and work out what that involves. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I did have a second question.
Another question? Yep.
Sorry, yes, that was all related to the first question. The second question is about the third recommendation around the consideration of continued investment. Is that not part of our long-term plan process anyway? Does it really need to have its own recommendation? Because it's, the urban cycle network is already a planned programme from the last long-term plan that had, planning going into future years. And I suppose, assumed that would be part of our process anyway. So does it really need its own recommendation, I suppose, is my question.
Yeah, thank you again, Councillor. I guess I see this as really just providing us a level of certainty that it will be addressed there. As you'll recall, the budget provision was only for 2 years, and the instruction around creating the master plan obviously has a much longer term potential around it. But just wanted to be certain and give ourselves the opportunity to provide certainty to staff that we did want to ensure that this was considered in the long-term planning process. So is it essential? No. Is it perhaps helpful? Well, I'm of the view that it is helpful, which is why myself and others in the transport portfolio put it up.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think through you possibly to the GM, it's a process question about the portfolio reports. So noting that the second recommendation here has triggered an officer report, I just wondered if the GM could comment on process around when portfolio reports come up, what triggers an officer report and what doesn't. Should a lack of officer report be taken that the operations of council are entirely happy with what's being put forward?
What triggers an officer's report is a notice of motion, and in fact this is like a notice of motion, and the councillor has provided the reasons for that recommendation. So any recommendation that comes direct to the council either through the portfolio system or a notice of motion on its own is looked at to see whether officer advice is required or not. And in this case, given the implications around resourcing, we felt it was appropriate to bring that attention to you.
So therefore not for recommendation 3. So the officer's report focuses on 2.
It does focus on recommendation 2. We haven't provided any advice on recommendation 3, but it should be noted any master plan or plan adopted by the council is a consideration through the long-term plan, whether that's a reserve management plan or in this case, an urban cycle network development master plan. It is taken forward, but we didn't really feel it was necessary to comment on this because it really just supports that process.
Thank you. And a further question, if I may, was to ask if it would be appropriate or if officers are able to provide any comment on the 2 additional items raised through the portfolio report of school zone speed limits and the Ashurst shared path.
The speed zone bylaw is a piece of work Julie's currently involved in. So Tom's standing. Let's go.
In relation to the Ashurst path, there are 3 landowners that we need to get sign off to use their land for part of the path. We've got ongoing dialogue with all those landowners, and we're hoping to bring that to resolution quite imminently. In this year's budget, we have got budget for construction of 1.5 km of the path, so we will be seeing action and momentum this year, which should help alleviate some of the concerns around the lack of action.
Tom, just to clarify, so you said that you've got ongoing dialogue with the 3 landowners and you're hoping to have a resolution. Is it fair to say, though, you've had ongoing dialogue for 5 years and you've been hoping for a resolution for 5 years?
Well, I haven't, but
the council as an organisation?
Yeah. So there is some complexity in that one of the pieces of land, Winstone's quarry, has changed hands between landowners. So initially it was owned by Higgins family. It then went to Fletcher's. We were on the cusp of getting sign off by Fletcher's to have access, and it was subsequently sold back to the Higgins family. So that was unhelpful, to say the least. In terms of the other aspect, the other landowner, which is essentially the organic farm, there has been ongoing dialogue there. We're in a situation where we're going to escalate it.
If I could just follow up that, Madam Chair, I'm just wondering what escalated means in that context.
We'll just pause for a moment.
Through you, Madam Chair. If we don't reach agreement, designation is an option.
Thank you. And I believe Julie will provide a comment on the other matter.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. The speed limits consultation, the bylaw consultation is out in stage 1 at the moment, as you are aware, and the schools issue is in part 2, as you've been advised previously, which will follow on from part 1.
Does that address your points? Councillors, are there any other questions? Okay, so just in regards to the recommendation 2, I appreciate these haven't been moved yet. Just so elected members are aware that if that resolution is moved, seconded and passes, then what would be required, because it's not currently within the workload or within the work plan for staff, is that they would then determine the priority. So it would be up to the discretion of the general manager to determine what essentially is moved down the ranks to accommodate that request, just so elected members are aware of that. Now, is there anybody that is willing to move the recommendations in full or part? Councillor Barrett, I'll look to your
Thank you.
lead.
Probably first, just for me to clarify process from here. If we were to vote on recommendation 2 and it were to lapse, we would still have the opportunity to consider the officer's memo and subsequently make a decision
if that was
around
identified as a notice of motion by somebody, that should item 2 lapse, that the officer's recommendation from the memo would be put, or alternatively, if somebody was wanting to move the officer's recommendation as the substantive motion.
Yep. So what I would like to do in that case is acknowledge the general manager's comment around recommendation 3, and I won't be seeking to move that, but I would like to move 1 and 2.
Is there a seconder? Councillor Butt? I will open for comment, and Councillor Barrett.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose my view is I want to make sure that we do end up with a pedestrian network improvement plan. I would still like to see us have a crack at it sooner rather than later. But if this fails, I think we would. I'd like to see us supporting the recommendation in the officer's report, so that at least we begin to bring it into the work program, albeit later than I would like to see it happen.
Councillor Butt, did you want to make a comment?
My comment is a strange one. I'm guessing that the opposition to these proposals is a budget kind of thing. And in the last meeting, there was a proposal for something where we were spending about $300,000 on something, and there was no budget in the system, and we still passed that resolution. So I'm supportive of this, that if we can find $300,000 for that project, there should be somewhere money sitting somewhere to find budget for this proposal. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if you'd like to make a comment.
Oh, look, if I'll just give comment that I won't be supporting this. Not that I'm not supportive of the general tract of where the council is going. It's just it's been quite obvious that it's a timing. It's more than Councillor Butt's referring to. It's actually a planning and a transportation workload and timing. We're just going to add more work into the system and come up with the same old result. I do think that this can be. I'll give notice of motion. If this fails, that I'll put something up around, or actually the recommendation from the officers that we look at this in the long-term plan. I am supportive of it, and that's the proper place at where it should be. This has come out of left field. Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Like the Mayor, I'd second the notice of motion to refer it to the long-term plan. Just in light of the budget provision we don't have, and I don't want to leave some of the other things we've already indicated priority for to be dropped out of the focus. So like other things that request developing and money, the long-term plan is a great place to refer it to alongside everything else. So that's my position. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm not going to support 2 either. And my reasons are, again, not because I don't think it would be a good idea to have a transport pedestrian network improvement plan. I think it would be an excellent idea, but I'd like it to be done thoroughly and properly with adequate time and resourcing. And it's clear from staff comment that that wouldn't be able to be achieved within the next 6 months. I'd also like to remind councillors that barely 6 weeks ago, the majority of you voted for a significant cut in operational expenditure. And the consequences of that will be felt throughout this year. This is one of those consequences. When you significantly cut operational expenditure, it means that there's no slack in the system for picking up extra pieces of work that you might like to be done throughout the year. And I'll remind you that you, as a majority, voted that we would cut the budget for library books. And this will be my measure throughout the year. Is this more important than library books? So I feel that, you know, we've cut the cloth now, as many of you were fond of saying at the time. The cloth has been cut, and it's not going to stretch to extra projects much as we would like it. So that's the reality of how we're working this year.
Councillor Beattie.
I'm the same, I'm against it. And just to remind councillors, I mean, we're already in the LTP process just about. It's not like it's the first year, we're in the 3rd year now. So we should be, I mean, pretty much 6 months is this process, so I don't see the point of it.
Councillors, just be aware we will separate 1 and 2 because we need to receive the report in order to then consider the officer's memo if it comes to that. Councillor Bowen, you had your pencil in the air? Oh, great. Councillor Hapera. Perfect. Are there any other comments on recommendation 1 and 2? Councillor Butt.
I just want to comment on your comments that you said we have to separate these 2 because we have to accept it means you are already declaring that it will fail.
No, I'm just advising that because there's a notice of motion that has been given, for us to be able to consider the notice of motion, that is a recommendation that has come from the report. Okay. So in terms of process, we need to accept the report anyway, but should we go to the notice of motion, 1 would have had to pass first.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. I'm just going to go back to Councillor Barrett for right of reply.
Just briefly, thanks all for comments. Again, you know, the thing that I'm most wanting us to achieve this morning is to ensure that in the future there is a pedestrian network development plan that clearly articulates a positive future for walking and pedestrian activity in the city that's safe, attractive, etc. Obviously, I would like us to get there sooner rather than later, but I've also heard the tenor of the comments, and it sounds like we might get there later rather than sooner. So look forward to the vote and the possibly subsequent motion.
Thank you. So we are going to vote on recommendation 1 first. Just to remind councillors that because we are voting electronically, that all votes are individually recorded.
Madam Chair, I've noticed though that the voting is not coming up on the screen, so we can't see who's voted what way. So that might be why there was a call for a division, so that it's public now.
Just one moment. So we will, I assume the division request is in relation to recommendation 2, in which case we can have that put up on the screen. So I'll invite you to vote on recommendation 1. This is to receive the report. That has carried 100%. We will now look to recommendation 2. That a plan to deliver pedestrian network improvements be developed by the Chief Executive and presented to Council within 6 months. And that has failed 4 in favour and 11 against. And I'll just ask if we can have the result on the screen. Thank you, Carly. We have got a notice of motion from the Mayor, and I think that was seconded by Councillor Dennison. Mr. Mayor, would you like to speak to that? Are there any other comments? Great, I'll invite you to vote. That has carried 100%. We'll now move on to the committee work schedule. And the General Manager tells me she has no further comment. Is there any questions? Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just in relation to the first item, the Civic and Cultural Precinct, I see that that's been referred to a briefing or workshop, and I'm just wondering what the intention is in terms of when, if any information will come through the committee and when that might be.
Through the chair, we'll be in a position to actually look at time frame after that 19th of August workshop briefing.
Thank you.
Councillor Barrett, did you have a question?
Just to follow up, Madam Chair, should we then not retain it on the work plan because it was a recommendation that this come back to this committee? Should it
Item 1?
Yeah.
Item 1 is still on the work plan. It's not intended to come off. The update is just that there is a briefing or workshop to be held on the 19th of August.
Okay.
So that there's no intention to remove that.
So that doesn't indicate that okay, thank you.
No, that just provides an update on the current position. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good to see that we're starting to think about how we reflect portfolio activity perhaps more consistently in the work schedule. I had understood that portfolios were more of a as the opportunity arose sort of approach rather than necessarily on a 6-monthly calendar as is suggested here. And I just wonder if a way forward might be that we have the various portfolios that report into a committee with a sort of as required note rather than a specific time note, so that it is raised in our consciousness that these portfolios have an opportunity, so that we don't lose sight of that, but that we don't try to structure it down to a specific month.
Sure. I think we could address that by changing the estimated report date just to TBA, and that ensures that the portfolio reporting still remains on the work schedule, so we don't lose sight of that, but it's to be determined by the portfolio holder.
Yes, I think a TBA, and I'd like to not see 6 monthly after the transport portfolio words, because I think that does suggest that opportunity wouldn't be available until February. And again, we signaled a couple issues that may continue to bubble to the surface more rapidly than that.
Absolutely heard that. We can make those changes. Any other questions? Great. Well, I will move that Planning and Strategy Committee receives its work schedule dated August 2020, seconded by Councillor Hancock. Thank you. Are there any comments? Great. I'll invite you to vote. And that has carried 100%. Nō reira, na mihi nui kia koutou, ina mana, ina reo, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. That concludes the Planning and Strategy Committee meeting. Thank you. I'll hand over to Councillor Bowen for some indication around timings for Arts, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Councillor Rutherford. We are a little ahead of where we expected to find ourselves, and almost all of the reports on this afternoon's agenda have external presenters. So we will look to begin again at 1:45, and I will advise that we will bring forward item 11 on the agenda, which is the military heritage update to be presented by David Murphy, and start with that report as the only one without an external. So sorry, David, and that gives us a chance to get all the externals lined up as well. Yes, we'll probably do the minutes and things then, but we'll be starting with that report and I want the officers to know. Thank you. See you at 1:45.